Thanks, Chair. Hi, folks. Thanks for coming along so late tonight. Just on that point of voluntary redundancies, how many voluntary redundancies have been implemented?
We're in the middle of the program. We've made offers to 17 people, but they haven't concluded, and those people are entitled to some time to consider them.
And how many have already been made voluntarily redundant?
One or two of the 17, I think, maybe. Three, sorry, Senator.
And were there some in addition to the 17? You said there was a number of 25 before. Does that mean 8 have already gone?
No, that means that in the next couple of years I'd like to reduce by about 25.
Okay, and the 17 forms part of the 25?
Yes.
Okay, great. So 3 have already gone. Is it true that the folk who've already gone includes 5 of the authority's highest credentialed and experienced directors?
The directors are among the group that haven't yet resolved. They're not yet resolved.
So you've had no changes at the director level?
No, that's not true. There would be a couple in that category, but we've had a number of directors indicate interest, and that process hasn't yet concluded. Okay,
so how many directors, which sections have so far been made redundant? You said 2. Which divisions were they directing?
I'd have to check unless you have them on top of your head.
As far as I know, there's no directors taken over.
One so far, Director of Tourism and Recreation.
Mm-hmm. You said 2 before. It's now just 1?
Well, when you're referring to directors, people at the EL2 level aren't all directors of sections, but I think we had expressions from 5, didn't we, or 4?
5, 4, 2, 1?
No, I could give you the exact figures if I could check
helpful.
it. Sure. It'll be resolved within, I think, 2 weeks because the clock is running for the offers that were made.
Okay, so have you made offers to directors?
Yes.
Yes, and to how many directors have offers been made?
5.
5. Okay, thank you. Have any staff taken voluntary redundancies since the Abbot Point dredging and dumping was approved?
Yes, Director of Tourism.
Okay, and that's the only staff member?
Excuse me, Senator. It's not the only staff member, it's the only director.
Okay. How many staff members have taken voluntary redundancies since that approval?
Including that director, 2 others.
Okay, 3 in total. From which sections of the organisation did those other 2 come?
Senator, as Dr Reichels referred to, one from the Tourism and Stakeholder Engagement section, which is one of the directors. Someone from the Finance and Office Services section. One person in Finance and Office Services. And a 3rd one from our Information Technology Communication section.
Okay. Was the Director of Tourism involved, or either of those other 2 staff involved in assessing that Abbot Point dredging and dumping permit?
Not to my knowledge.
No, okay. So nobody's left as a result of the grant of that permit, to your knowledge?
No voluntary redundancies have declared that as their reason.
Okay. Now, just going to the PBS, we've got a number of figures that have been bouncing around. Can you just confirm for me? I've got the table on page 197 suggests that the budget savings that you'll have to find in the next financial year are 1.026 million. I believe that's right. Can you tell me which programs that will affect?
So the savings measures will be part of have to be incorporated into our overall budget, including the increase in the efficiency dividend and the savings measure across the organisation.
So if in terms of what will be affected, it's difficult to say because we're doing a restructure as a result. So we will have fewer people. We will be focusing on high priority areas. I doubt there'll be anything we'd absolutely drop, but some low priority areas will take longer to deliver their goals.
Okay, and which are those low priority areas that will be slower in delivering their goals?
We're in the middle of that corporate planning right now.
Essentially what we're doing right across government, Senator Waters, is cut our code according to our cloth. And
thanks, Minister.
Given
just stick
well,
with the chair.
I'm just answering. I'm just providing context, as is my prerogative, to the answers here. As you would appreciate, we are facing a significant fiscal challenge as a government as a result of the situation that we've inherited from the previous government.
Minister, you have said this several times today. I don't mean to be rude, but I have very limited time and I have specific questions rather than just the general rant that you provided.
It is very important that right across government we make decisions to ensure that government spending is as efficient and as well targeted as possible. And while there might be things that if money wasn't an issue that we would like to be able to do, it is very important for us to appropriately prioritise given the budget situation that we find ourselves in.
Chair, it appears that over the last 12, 13 years or so that your direct appropriations, your core funding has essentially been steady. Is that correct, that it's been roughly 22 million in direct appropriations since about 2002? Not excluding your program funding, which has obviously bounced around, but your core funding?
I'd have to defer to the Director of Finance since I only arrived in 2007.
Off the top of my head, Senator, I think that's probably a reasonable statement. There have been a variety of programs where we've received funding through the Natural Heritage Trust, through Reef Rescue. There's been variations to the amount of funding coming through those programs. In 2007, just before Dr Reichelt came to the authority, we did receive a significant increase in our funding for the field management program, which was matched by the Queensland Government, which was probably the major change in the last 6 or 7 years.
Okay, so just on that core funding, given that my understanding it hasn't been indexed, what has been the reduction in real terms to Gabrumpa's core operating budget?
We do receive indexation, and we also are subject to the efficiency dividend, and at the moment the two balance each other out.
Very fortuitous.
Okay, so there hasn't been an increase in funding over those 14 years because whatever's been indexed has been lost.
The total funding has certainly increased in the last 8 years. I'd have to go back and look at the details of the
would you mind taking that on notice? Thanks for that. I want to move on now to Abbot Point. Where is the final permit assessment for the dredging and dumping approval, and why is that not public? We've got the permit, obviously, but not the permit assessment document.
Senator, we don't normally make the permit assessment document publicly available. We do provide and have provided the statement of reasons for both of the permit decisions, and they can be found on our website.
Okay, is that a document that you can make available through this estimates process?
The assessment.
The permit assessment?
That would be subject to a Freedom of Information request, and that would be the normal process by which we would release the document.
Right, so I can't just ask for it tonight? I have to put in a Freedom of Information request?
Senator, what I don't know is whether it's actually already been provided with documents that have been provided.
Well, I know I've not seen it, and I've had quite an interest in the FOI documents so far.
My colleague, I think you can ask for it, certainly.
Okay, well, consider that so asked for. Thank you.
We take that one on.
Yes, thanks. If you
notice,
could,
please.
thanks very much. If you could provide that as soon as you can. Did Gabrumpa ever take the chance to directly brief Minister Hunt, or Minister Butler or Burke for that matter, on your concerns about the Abbot Point dredging and dumping proposal?
The process for EPBC assessments that our advice is sought through the department rather than with the Minister, and we had many exchanges with the department.
Okay, but none directly with the Minister?
No, not until right at the final step of a letter to us checking our concurrence with the conditions that were applied.
And when was that? That was, what, December?
Must have been close. Yes, I would think so. Do you remember the date?
Okay.
It would have been late November or December.
Okay, great. So did Gabrumpa officials ever express the concerns that were held during the course of 2013, including that the proposed offsets were unachievable?
take that up?
Senator, there was, as there commonly is between ourselves and the department, quite a lot of interaction, discussions and emails going backwards and forwards around assessments, impacts, and in this case around potential offsets and proposed offsets, ranging from some of our more junior staff interacting with their peers in the department through to more senior staff. And there was a range of issues which were raised in relation to offsets, which were considered along the way, and some of which ended up influencing the final conditions in the EPBC permit.
What's your position, Mr Elliot?
My position at the Garoompa, I'm the General Manager for Biodiversity Conservation and Sustainable Use.
Okay, so that's a fairly senior position by the sound. So I have an email here from you expressing concerns about the offset conditions. So clearly that concern wasn't just held by junior officers, although it certainly was also held by junior officers. There's quite a litany of material here, including, as I said, an email from you expressing concern. What happened to all of this concern? There was an awful lot of it on the record in 2013, and then even in the permit assessment draft, still an awful lot of concerns, still a list of huge risks to the reef from offshore dumping, and yet the permit was granted. Can you explain what happened there?
And certainly, Senator, I can comment. Early in the process, as we were going through and looking at the proposal as it stood, before all of the measures to avoid and mitigate some of those risks were fully considered and fully examined. In some of those early correspondence, I had discussions with some of my staff around the offsets. As I say, the conditioning around the offsets did evolve over time, and so by the time we got to the end of the process, where we had the final proposal with the final conditions, I was comfortable that the condition that was put in place was one that could be achieved. You'll note, Senator, that the condition itself doesn't propose the solution to providing the offset. It requires the proponent to provide that plan, and that's something I think that the proponent needs to be afforded the opportunity to do so. What Garoompa is not is a agency full of engineering experts who can say what is or isn't possible with regard to achieving the offset.
So is it the case, Mr Elliot, that your concerns about the adequacy of offsets remain? It's just that there is now a process through which those concerns need to be dealt with. I'll put that another way. You just said yourself that the conditions don't solve the problem. They merely set up the fact that yet another plan has to be drafted, a dredging and spoil disposal management plan. And you now hope that that plan will address your concerns. Do you still harbour those concerns? What if that plan doesn't address your concerns?
I wouldn't use the word hope, Senator. I think that that the offsets, the long-term improvement in water quality through offsets, as per the condition, is something that's achievable. And
are you talking about Minister Hunt's condition or your own condition here? Let's just be clear.
We don't have a condition relating to the offsetting of water quality, Senator. Okay,
so you're not talking now about the dredging, spoil and disposal management plan in your own permit. You're talking about Minister Hunt's magical 150% improvement in water quality by dumping 5 million cubic metres.
The dredging and disposal management plan,
5 million
which is something that's required under both the EPBC approval and our own permits, is something that we also sign off on because it's listed as one of the conditions of our permit.
It is science-based, it's evidence-based, it follows a proper process. I mean, I think that is a bit of coloured language there where you're inviting...
Let the officer answer the question. Hopefully he can shed some light on that and you won't need to...
I just need to correct the premise of your question. The government absolutely rejects the description of magic here. The government has gone through a thorough, methodical, science and evidence-based process,
which this officer earlier criticised, which is precisely why I'm questioning him now.
Continue, Minister. Have you finished?
And incidentally, the conditions generally imposed by the government in relation to this project are more stringent than the conditions that were applied by the government that you were a part of until the 18th of September 2013.
Well, thank you, Minister. I've never been in government, but I appreciate the compliment.
Yeah,
Mr. Elliot, could you continue?
Senator, our permit does not include any conditions that require an offset for water quality
Okay,
improvement.
so let's just go back to your early statement before that kerfuffle. You were saying that you are now contented with
So
the final
we are
conditions.
asked to provide advice, as we routinely are, on the conditions that are going to be applied to the EPBC approval, if it's going to be, or if it's proposed to approve it. So we provided advice along the way in that context. When we got
Quite
to the end of
strong
that
advice.
process, after numerous discussions and swapping of correspondence between us and the department, I was comfortable that a long-term improvement in the water quality was achievable, and therefore I had no problems with that condition. Now the requirement is there for the proponent to demonstrate how they're going to do that.
So, Mr. Elliot, what changed? Because my understanding is the conditions didn't change, and yet somehow your concerns are now satisfied. What was the trigger to satisfy you? When did that change happen, and what was the change?
For me, it probably would have been when I originally came into the Abbot Point project, which was when I took over, when that particular section through a restructure came under me on the 1st of July 2013. I looked at all the information that we had, sat down with the staff and let them explain to me what their concerns were over things like offsets and other impacts. And over time worked my way through all of those with my staff and also with discussions with the department over offsets. Now, there were a number of, I think, assumptions which were being made in some of the calculations around offsets at the time, which weren't entirely accurate. They included the total volumes that needed to be offset. That's something that did evolve over time. The number of years over which the offset was required to be achieved. To give you an example, one document I saw early on in the piece was basically based on the assumption they would all have to be done in one hit. Now that wouldn't have been achievable, but over multiple years, it's a different story and it's a different, the viability changes entirely. So they're the sorts of things that which led me to the conclusion that a long-term improvement through an offset in the water quality to offset the water quality impacts, which would be temporary in nature from that action, would be achievable.
How about a net improvement in the values of the World Heritage Area? Is that achievable from those conditions?
That's a more difficult question, Senator. In theory, a long-term improvement in water quality flows on to things like habitats and species, and therefore does provide or can provide a net improvement in the values overall. That doesn't mean that every single value will necessarily improve, but overall there will be a net improvement in the values.
How about what you mentioned is the likely permanent loss of seagrass and benthic primary producer habitat associated with commercial or recreational fishing?
Seagrass is, tends to be impacted by many things, Senator, and at the moment in the Abbot Point region, the seagrass is actually fairly low, and that's not being caused by port operations. It's being caused primarily by natural events, weather events, cyclones, floods, etc. One of the concerns we did have when we were doing our assessment is that these activities might delay the return of that seagrass. But what I wasn't expecting is, in the longer term, the permanent loss of large volumes of seagrass, noting that if you dredge an area where there is seagrass, obviously the action of dredging will remove that seagrass. Interestingly enough, though, it sometimes then starts to grow wherever you dispose of that dredged material because you move the seed banks along with the...
Well, depending on how deep the water is, obviously. But so you say that you took over this project, the Abbot Point proposal assessment on the 1st of July. Who was the officer that was previously dealing with it prior to yourself?
Andrew Skeeton was the general manager of that area.
Why was he no longer... What was the change?
It was a restructure because another colleague at the same level retired, and I wanted to manage with a broader span of control underneath the three general managers. I also wanted to take that opportunity in the middle of last 13 to bring the science community within the authority into much closer contact with the assessment community. They'd been previously separated, and I could see longer-term benefit in improving the quality of environmental assessment by integrating our science groups and our water quality groups into the assessment, under the assessment umbrella, which led to that restructure.
Okay, so what does Mr Skate do now?
He's in charge of Great Barrier Reef operations. He runs the aquarium, our legal section, and our very important field management program.
Okay.
And Indigenous partnerships.
Okay. I'll put some more questions around the well-documented concerns of your organisation at various steps along the way on notice, because there is a large volume of material and some very strongly expressed concerns, which you've addressed some of those tonight, but there's more in there that I don't have time to transgress this evening. In the release of some documents that I sought through an order for production of documents, which hopefully I can put my hands on if needed, Gabrumpa states that, I quote, "There are well-documented environmental and social risks associated with the impacts of dredge material disposal to the marine environment." Are you aware of the Queensland Resource Council's current Reef Facts, as they call it, campaign, and their claim that port dredging has never been scientifically recorded as contributing to coral cover loss or a historic decline in the health of the reef?
Senator, we have always been of the position that dredging and disposal, particularly if not managed well, can have significant localised impacts. That's the position I think we had in our 2009 outlook, and certainly the position that's in the strategic assessment and is likely to be in the 2014 outlook. So we've always been of that view. The statement made by the Queensland Resources Council is based on the study by the Australian Institute of Marine Science, which found that the primary loss of coral cover over their 27-year study was from extreme weather and crown of thorns starfish, with some from coral bleaching. But what that study doesn't do is include as many inshore reefs, which would have been affected potentially by other things. So the impact of water quality, both that coming off the catchment and other impacts of water quality, has a greater effect in inshore areas. Now that doesn't mean that we've seen coral loss over the years from dredging, because and I wouldn't want to say whether there's evidence out there or not. I'm not aware of any particular studies which demonstrate that evidence.
We haven't undertaken a line-by-line analysis of QRC's campaign.
There's not much to it. It won't take you long if you want to.
I'm sorry, I haven't even seen the ads, but I've heard about them. I'd rather we haven't done such an analysis of it, and their ads direct your questions to QRC perhaps, but.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah. No, look, Mr. Elliott's provided some help there where he's I think, taken a contrary position to the Queensland Resources Council, unsurprisingly. So I was going to ask if you considered the QRC campaign to be misleading, but Chair, you'd rather not pass judgment?
Well, it's just that as a regulator and authority, we see a lot of material in the public domain of various quality, and we don't analyse each and every one of them. We prefer to put our position through considered, reviewed documents like Outlook and strategic assessments, and it's not a productive arena for us to be participating in. No disrespect to your questioning, but it's if we would spend every waking hour dissecting information in the public domain, and we don't have the time. Yes,
that's fine. You mentioned the AIMS study, which cited the major causes of coral loss historically since 1985 as storms and cyclones or extreme weather, crown of thorns and bleaching. The Queensland Government's Reef Facts website also cites those statistics, and as does the Queensland Resources Council. They seem to then try to distance themselves from some of those impacts. Would it be fair to say that climate change is both impacting and expected to worsen, and indeed is driving at least the storms, the cyclones and the bleaching?
My understanding of the IPCC analysis is that there are links, and the scientists are debating frequency and intensity of extreme weather. The short take on climate change is it ranks as our top strategic risk to the barrier reef in the long run. There's measurable impacts now from was correlative, but it's to do with acidity and the declining density of coral skeletons, and again by AIMS. So the effects are measurable now. I understand the Senate's questioned the Met Bureau Chief, Rob Vertesi, numerous times about when does weather become climate. We are agreeing with the scientific consensus that in the long run that is the single biggest threat to the Great Barrier Reef by a long margin. Underneath that you've got these other things that, AIMS talked about storms and runoff. They also mentioned starfish, and there's a debate running now about the distinction between starfish as a symptom and a cause. I tend to agree with there are strong drivers of a water quality effect on starfish, excess nutrient. I also think underplayed is the predator hypothesis. I think we've removed a lot of predators of baby starfish basically from the reef in the last century, and so that I'm just putting the picture of where we see the major risks.
Sure.
I'll give you one for the last question, Senator Waters.
Thanks,
before we
Chair.
wind up.
So do you agree with the World Heritage Committee's draft recommendations in relation to the potential for the reef to be listed on the World Heritage in Danger list in another 12 months? In particular, they noted significant concern. They say there's significant concerns remain about the long-term deterioration of key aspects of the overall universal value of the property. What's your response to that?
Sorry, Chair, that is actually asking for an opinion, not for factual information. So, like, that wouldn't be appropriate for the officer to be required to answer that question.
Would you like to rephrase it some other way?
Okay, does the Marine Park Authority have a view on whether those claims are
Look, we work closely
sustained by the
with...
facts?
Asking for a view is by definition.
Well, they are the
asking for an
experts.
opinion. Well,
Yeah, I won't give an opinion as such.
Asking for their scientific expert.
Yeah, I would say we work closely with the responsible officers in the department, including the Deputy Secretary here, who represents Australia's position into that committee, and as does the Minister, who's the responsible Minister, Minister Hunt. We are part of the Australian Government. We support the government's efforts to represent the beauty and the outstanding universal values of the Great Barrier Reef.
Thank you, Senator Waters. Any more questions you have to put on notice? And could I say that